we can start. And originally, we're going to talk about this book, this new book, but this is just the beginning of this dialogue that we're gonna set up and put forward about the new NAFTA, the so-called USMCA. And we represent, myself and Graciela, also a Mexican network, Innovación on labor in the auto sector. We have been working for about 4 years, 5 years now. And every year, we publish a book as a result of our discussions. This is the third book that we publish, and right now we have 2 books more coming out. And this is the kind of topics and problems that we discuss about the Mexican auto industry, always thinking in the opportunities and restrictions of the fact that automotive industry in Mexico has become one of the hottest spots worldwide. And we think about the tendencies, we think about the labor relations issues, we think about and discuss about public policies, and the internal and external situation. And you know for sure that what is the situation in Mexico regarding the lowering of labor standards. And even in one point, especially Graciela and myself, we're asked the question if it's going to be needed for Mexico to change a kind of external pressure. Is Mexico not able to change the situation by the institutions itself? Is going to be needed something happens around in the international scenario? And many things, the productive situations, the industrial policy, labor policy, and so on. It's not possible to go in detail in all these issues. Even some of our colleagues are especially interested in the possibilities for upgrading, for innovation, for, they say, catching up. And we come to the idea that Mexico is trapped in the oil era, we say, which means that most of the cars that Mexico produces are dependent on the North American market, the American one especially, and even one of the some of our colleagues carry out this study showing that even the many cars in Mexico don't comply with the requirements of emissions and efficiency, and so it's a big issue. And yeah, so some of us put the problem in brief in 2 traps. We say we are trapped in the oil era, and we are trapped in the labor, lowering of labor standards situation that put us in the, take us back to the previous century. So, this is the kind of issues that, again, we have been discussing, and of course you can buy this book, it's packed, and it's a great book. And this leads us to discuss what is the current situation of the NAFTA and the US, Mexico, Canadian, YMCA, something like that, people say right now. And we figure out this panel, which is a fabulous idea and possibility to exchange some point of view with great people. Todd from Syracuse University, John Holmes from Queen's University, Graciela, myself, and thank you. I just want to say time presenting and doing this introduction. So, and, the idea is we're going to have this kind of informal, not formal panel. We try to do it in kind of a kind of round table. So in 5 minutes or so, each of us is going to introduce the topic, and then we're going to move to a couple of questions and open the session for two questions also. I got one question, and of course one question is going to be what is the main features of the new free trade deal. And another question that I had myself is a secret question. Is I'm just going to disclose it in a moment. And I'm going to start for Graciela and myself talking about the NAFTA outcomes. This is going to be our 5 minutes or so. And yeah, it's just this is a brief. The situation on Mexico is crystal clear, we say. Mexico become again main player in the auto sector, but just from the side of production, not from the side of the market and selling and buying and consumer, which shows exactly the place of Mexico in the global auto industry. And you can see this just happened in the last few years, in the last decade, but of course is related to NAFTA. But the boom of the Mexican industry just exploded in the last few years. And this is a perspective 2 decades after NAFTA. What is the situation of the Mexican economy? This is just a view. This is the perspective of GDP per capita. And what we say is a complete disaster result. Mexico is on the 3rd place, but from below, from the bottom to up, which is incredible, being one of the main economies in Latin America, the 12th economy in the global, in the global economy, the 12th one. And Mexico has been doing work that small countries, very poor countries like Central American countries and so on, El Salvador, Honduras, which is right now going through this incredible human tragedy and so on. From the social and labor perspective, we got this, and we have been discussing the gap between labor, productivity, and wages. This is not new, and just to show that the mismatch has been just really radical and dramatic. And we also say, we raise the question, is this a kind of just a Mexican tendency, or is a kind of North American tendency, or is a kind of global tendency? Our answer is a North American tendency. It's not a global tendency. We don't have time to go in deeper, but we compare Mexico with Central East Europe, and the situation is not like this. It's the opposite. Okay, here is the data. And this is the evolution of wages during the NAFTA era. And we say Mexico, after 20-something years of free trade, go from doing less than $2, 1.9, to 2.3. So in 20-something years, just improved Mexico 40 cents of dollars. And yeah.
Is this average wages?
Yes,
Average
exactly,
dollars per hour?
exactly.
As
And
opposed to
first,
starting, it's not
yeah,
starting.
the blue bar is,
Average.
belongs to the assembly sector, and
And
the
is it-
orange is the auto parts. Yeah.
But it's not the starting salary, it's starting wage, it's the average.
Exactly.
Average of wage.
As you said,
Average of wage.
Yeah.
And is it controlling for inflation? Is it real?
it's controlling
Yeah.
for inflation.
Yes.
It's controlling for
Yes.
PP, parity of power purchase.
Purchasing power
Yeah,
parity.
that's correct.
All right,
Yeah,
thank you.
Oh.
yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah, try to be comparable, controlling for the basic variables. So, yeah, and yeah, Mexico has not improved, but the case is to stress that Canadian and American workers have been going worse, are going down, completely down. And this is the evolution of autoemployment, and we see this practically Mexico is approaching rapidly to get the same amount of employment that USA. So we conclude in this, there is a radical change in the geography of production, there is a more radical change in the geography of labor and employment. This is clearly moving south. So finally, the North American position. Yeah, and we try to stress here that a big problem lying behind of this situation is that the Detroit and the American producers are losing ground, not only worldwide, but in North America. They are losing the lead in North America in terms of production. They are losing the lead in terms of market also. In the case of Mexico, it's crystal clear, this situation. From controlling about 2/3 of the market, they are just going 1/3 or less than 1/3. And yeah, this is the situation of the global auto industry. And again, we try to stress this big transition, big transformation. The global auto industry is going south. And finally, this is a different perspective. One is what is exactly each country doing, and another perspective is what exactly is the firms, the corporations doing. And what we see here is not only that Asian and European, especially Japanese and German, have displaced Detroit 3, but even how close is the Korean, for instance, the Korean, how close is it, how fast is approaching the former big three. And that's it. This is our introduction, and yeah, do you want to go,
Sure.
John?
Yeah.
And again, thank you for being with us.
Okay. I've got a few slides.
Yeah,
So-
sure.
Good morning. We're in intimate session.
Yeah.
This one.
This one. Can you help me to, yeah, just to put it there?
Just need the full screen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, thanks, Alex, and for convening this little panel.
Yeah.
And look forward to the discussion. I've just prepared a few slides, sort of taking that notion of the theme of future of the North American auto industry and sort of calling it a Canadian perspective. And what I'm going to say really draws on, just in the last week or so, Charlotte Yates and myself have just finished a paper on the future of the auto industry in Canada, which is currently out for review. So, Charlotte can butt in and correct me if I say something wrong there. We're not advancing.
That's unlikely.
We're not.
Just.
Oh, okay. Slideshow. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Okay, so I think where we begin is the notion that the auto industry remains still a very major industry for Canada. And like Mexico, we're tremendously reliant on the US market and having access to the US market, because over 90% of the vehicles and parts that are produced in Canada for export wind up in the US. And I would emphasize the point that it's not just that the parts wind up in the US, but a very significant proportion of them wind up in the Great Lakes region on the American side of the border: Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois. And so the Canadian industry, which is highly, highly concentrated in just a small part of Ontario, just across, basically about for the 400 kilometers east of Detroit, it's tremendously highly integrated with the Great Lakes, states. And I mean, just as an example, I mean, this is a rear suspension assembly for a Chevy Equinox, showing the parts that are coming. I mean, this is something that's being assembled in London, Ontario, for assembly in Kami, but a mix of parts mainly coming out of those Great Lakes states and Ontario, going into the assembly of this rear suspension. Now, in the paper that Charlotte and I have just written, we say that, that this is an important industry for Canada. It's done well in the past, but it's facing a number of headwinds at present. And in the paper, we talk about a series of challenges confronting the industry and discuss each of those in turn. And we talk about technological change, which is fairly radical technological change, which can potentially has a significant impact upon the parts sector in Canada. We talk about the supply logistics, and this comes back to Alex's point about as the assembly capacity has shifted southward, not just to Mexico, but with the emergence of this new auto-producing region in the southeastern United States. This means that for suppliers located in Ontario, logistics become a major problem. And many of these companies are now opening up production facilities in the southern US and in Mexico in order to overcome that, which is good for those firms, but doesn't do much for employment in Ontario. And then we've got the trade agreements. And a whole series, Canadian Free Trade Agreement with Korea, with European Union, the Trans-Pacific arrangement, and now the new NAFTA. And we also talk about market impact of changing demographics. Now, I'm just going to say a few words about the trade deal, and especially the renegotiation of NAFTA. Okay. So, you know,
Okay,
he knocks it down,
we got it.
and we both work hard to build it back up again.
John, you have to send this to all of us.
I wanna see
Awesome.
that.
I need that on my door.
Because somebody at in Geneva asked me some comments about the need. Send me that.
Well, I must have
no comments.
That isn't original to me. I borrowed it from
You didn't draw it, John?
from a colleague who I've been interacting with a lot about.
And they drew it?
I don't know where. This was Sandy. I don't know where Sandy got it from, but
It's
he
absolutely
gave a presentation the other day. And that was.
Talk about
He
coordination.
shared that with me.
There we are.
So I think at the end of the day, for the auto and especially for the auto sector, this is sort of the Canadian response. Okay, it could have been so much worse. In fact, it could have been a complete disaster. Okay, I think one thing to bear in mind, and that's why I use this graphic, is that it really is still very much a hub and spoke arrangement. Okay, with Mexico and Canada both exporting a significant number of vehicles into the US and parts, and also importing a fair number of parts from, in the case of Canada, from the US for assembly in Canada. But relatively low levels of trade in autos directly between Canada and Mexico.
In Mexico.
So, the New Deal, okay?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's all about the rules of origin and regional content value. And these are just a couple of quotes that if you don't have to, don't go there, okay? Rules of origin are horrendously complex and difficult to, when you read the trade deals and try to understand some of these, they're tremendously complex, and as always, the devil is usually in the details.
That's correct.
And in the new NAFTA, there are three key sections which apply to the auto sector. There's Chapter 4, and especially Annex 4B, which spells out the new rules of origin and regional content value in order to qualify for preferential tariff. There's then an annex to Chapter 2 that deals with imports to the US from Mexico that do not qualify as originating under the new USMCA rules. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. And then thirdly, there are two side letters, the US-Canada side letter and the US-Mexico side letter, which provide certain exemptions up to specified levels of auto imports to the US should the US impose Section 232 tariffs, the so-called security clause in the Trade Expansion Act. And I won't go into this in detail, but these are the RU and RCA and RCV requirements that are in that first Chapter 4 and Annex 4B. I mean, what everybody I think knows about are the increase in the regional content value levels. But there are other things that have gone in there now. There's for a vehicle to qualify, certain core components have to be originating within the region. And the vehicle only originates if in the previous year the maker has purchased at least 70% of their steel and aluminum requirements from within North America. And then there's this labor value content rule that is now in there, which in and of itself is quite complicated, and there's still a lot of thought and discussion about how this is actually going to be calculated.
And make sure.
Because, I mean, you know, in general, people talk about, well, it now means that 40% of the content value has to come from plants that are paying a base wage rate of $16 US. But there are certain credits that can be built into that for R&D and technical technical costs. And then the tracing requirements are now much more complicated within the agreement.
Can you take 2 or 3 minutes more?
Sure.
This one?
Yep.
This one, yeah.
So what I've done is then, what's the impact of this from a Canadian perspective? Canadian production might potentially could increase as a result of this, especially if we can capture a portion of that increased level of North American content. And then I go through each of those 3 in turn. I look at Annex 2C. This is this one that says, and I interpret this, and I'd be interesting to hear what Alex and Graciela say about this, but I interpret this, during the negotiations, there was comment that the Mexican negotiators were seeking a grandfathering of existing production in Mexico. And I interpret this Annex 2C as really tackling that, because it says, okay, if you don't meet the new rules, then up to 1.6 million vehicles could still come in duty-free as long as they meet the old rules.
And is that your interpretation, or it's the interpretation of...
You can read the annex.
Is that how you interpret the annex?
That's
or is
my
it quite
reading of
specified?
that's my reading of the annex. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, why?
Yeah, we can continue and
Sure. Yeah.
later we can take this
Okay.
question.
Yeah.
You wanna put something else?
No, I mean
Or
the only thing I did
talk,
was then just talk about the Section 232 side letters. Okay, in a similar way. And I think that's about it. I mean, I was just saying that I think from a Canadian point of view, overall, I think there was relief and guarded optimism with regards to the auto sector.
Yeah.
I would like that to go back to 232.
Yeah, to the 2, can you
Because
just
it's
walk
the
through
new
the
tool.
232?
No, because Alex wants me to.
But the problem is that I want to understand what they can do, because
Can you just
232,
explain the previous slide?
232 is very strategic in the
Yeah.
Okay, just a previous
in the
and
policy of Donald
can you
Trump.
close this
exactly.
point
We must
and wrap a
know
little
what
about
they
it?
can
And,
do
I
with
agree.
that in the near term.
okay, just a couple of minutes for talk.
Sure. Is that what you prefer?
John, can John just explain this?
Yeah,
slide?
just explain
just
this.
explain
This
that.
if
Well-
you don't mind, it's okay.
No, I'm
It's
fine.
okay?
Yeah.
I mean, you can take just a minute or something.
So what's the question?
It's about the impact of 232 in the near future.
Okay.
You have figures there,
Yeah.
as I understand. So
Yeah.
This is
Okay.
your interpretation.
Oh no, those
No,
are
it
the
is in the letter.
figures. Those are the numbers.
So walk us
Okay.
through the slide,
Inside.
John.
Okay.
That's what we're asking you to do.
Okay.
Okay, pretty simple.
Okay. What the side letter says is that if in the future the U.S. Imposes tariffs under Section 232,
Yeah.
then there will be exemptions
Okay.
for up to these numbers. So it's 2.6 million cars from each country. All light trucks are exempt.
And does that include SUVs like
That,
trucks?
no, because it's pickups.
Okay.
But there was a ruling some time ago that said
F1s,
SUVs
Ford
qualify as
150.
cars. And then these levels, these levels of parts, right? And so it's really interpreted, I think, as being an insurance for Canada and Mexico in the event that 232 tariffs are imposed. Now, I mean, if Trump imposed 232 tariffs against all vehicle and parts imports, then with these side letters, it then means that offshore producers would be hit with the tariffs, would be less competitive within the North American market,
Right.
but Canada and Mexico would be protected.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Charles.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Good checking.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
The new weapon.
here.
You
And then
got,
I've got something.
can you help
Just-
us? Just to make sure that.
Where are we here?
I'm not the chair of the set.
CRIMT. Where is it now?
But that is an important slide.
Yeah.
Leadership complex, as our trade minister would say, she does have a turn of phrase.
That's it. Yeah. You're better at finding it than I am. Thank you. Perfect. Thanks. Okay. So I want to thank Alex for having me here and for setting up this session. It's also really good because I really hadn't had the chance to really look at what the New Deal is, and I'm also lecturing to my students on Monday on it, so it's given me like, okay, good, I can do this. So yesterday I was going through, and in the good traditions of the auto industry, I outsourced my research to CAR in Michigan, which is always a good decision to do. So, and they also had these really interesting things. So a lot of this just simply reviews some of the things that John has mentioned already. But there are a couple of things that we need to bear in mind. First of all, if we look at the regional value content, it's interesting if you look at light vehicles, 75% core parts, but then there's a somewhat descending levels to complementary parts and principal parts. So, which tend to be more what we would call the labor-intensive aspects. Okay, and then also. We've talked a little bit, I want to talk more about the labor side, but I'll talk about it in a minute. This notion of having at least 40% of passenger cars, $16 an hour and more, and pickup trucks, 45%. There's also other kind of interesting things about parts and components. So for example, parts imports I think are going to be limited to $32.4 billion a year from Canada and $108 billion a year from Mexico. In 2017, Canada was at about half of that, around 16 billion, and Mexico was, again, about 53 billion, okay? So there's this kind of room to grow in terms of export of components.
But only if Section 232 gets implemented.
Yes, that's correct. Okay. That's correct. I'm sorry.
So right now it's completely wide open.
It's wide
open.
232.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then one thing that Carr mentioned is that 40% of Mexican assembled cars, of the components, for those cars actually come from the United States. So I think there's this, especially in the United States, I think that a lot of people don't understand the amount of components that are actually made in the United States that go into Mexican cars.
So that's components.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, and
it's
just
okay.
yeah, it's 40%. Yeah, yeah. So just a couple of things on that. Now, most vehicles apparently produced in the United States and Canada already meet these requirements. So nearly 70% of Mexican cars already meet the requirements of the new rules, okay? So on one level, there's not an enormous amount of change. But also, automakers who sell, they sell about 82% of their US automotive production in the US. And because those cars never leave the country, they're not subject to the rules of origin. So because so much of those cars, so you see 82% of the cars that are sold in the United States are basically made in the United States, as I understand this chart. Although what we'll see, which is interesting if you break it down, the country that's going to be affected the most, or the auto producers from the countries like Germany, are actually the ones that are going to have potentially the most challenges bringing themselves up to the required average.
Can you explain why? Just go into it, because that would be my estimation.
Well, because I think the Japanese have brought over a lot of components plants as well as assembly. Okay.
Into the U.S.
Into the U.S. Germany, I think, still is importing a lot of, especially the higher value-added components like engines, powertrains, and things like that. Well, John and I had this conversation last night that some of the Mexican plants produce for the European market, and in that same plant, some of those they're making cars for the U.S. and Canadian market too. So they have different rules of origin for all of those, right? So it's going to be interesting whether the assembly plants in Mexico, like VW, are they going to simply switch more of their production to go to Europe if they can sell it there?
I don't know how they could, because if you looked at John's trade numbers, 2/3 of Mexican production still goes to the US. So even though a large amount goes to Europe, so much goes to the US.
Yeah.
That's like, it's not like you can suddenly pivot that big.
But that 2/3 includes both U.S., Japanese, German producers. So I'm just talking strictly
Yeah, but
speaking,
still.
whether they can do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean they'll obviously have some incentives now to try to increase that. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the labor side of it. I mean, I think Alex has pointed out quite strongly how badly NAFTA has served the interest of Mexican workers in terms of wages and so forth, and that's got a lot of attention. And you know, if you look at trade union reaction, there's a lot of ambivalence. On the one hand, many of the trade unions in North America are not thrilled about Trump, but on the other hand, they you know, this is a long-standing issue for, when I talk to Canadian trade unionists, when I talk to American ones, is about what they perceive as this kind of the weight of competition from low wages in Mexico. So, and I can't speak obviously for Mexican independent unions and things like this, how they're perceiving this. I think, as we know, the devil will be in the details about exactly what will happen, and I think a lot of it has to do with what will happen with the new government coming in, how much they will push an agenda to raise wages, to create a more independent labor movement. That's another thing. But let's take a little look at what the new agreement says about this. So basically, the idea is that because a lot of Mexican workers signed these so-called protection union deals, these are set up before, in fact, anybody even gets hired, and so the wages are very low. There's basically no real wage bargaining involved in that. So Mexican workers would have access to secret ballot union elections, right? So and some capacity for independence. So it also they would have to meet international standards set by the United Nations. So there's that on that.
Meaning the ILO?
Yeah, the ILO. That's correct. Yes. So as we've seen, between 40 and 45% of cars would have to need to be by workers making at least $16 an hour, which is about 3 times the current minimum in Mexico. But the question is, how is this going to get enforced? And again, it goes back to the point that was raised by John, is that rules of origin, labor content, and so forth. It's easy to set what the bar is, but it's very, very difficult to know exactly what is happening, and whether in fact this is even very serious about it. Is again kind of, you know, Trump wants to sort of be associated with a deal that looks good to parts of his base in the working class and so forth, and make trade unions in the United States not sure who they should vote for. You know, you can sort of see it's really about sort of a window dressing. But what I would argue is that the attention and focus on Mexico, to some degree, as much as there needs to be changes there, and I think we all agree about that, what it really obscures is the relative collapse of auto manufacturing wages, especially parts, in the United States. Okay, so 2014 report, which I can't put up here, basically in 2014 in the United States, one in every 4 American manufacturing workers and parts workers was making less than $12 an hour. Okay, the big
McDonald's sounds better.
What's that?
McDonald's sounds better.
Yeah, well, these are in parts, especially parts has collapsed enormously since the early 2000s. So $16 an hour would look good, not just for Mexican workers, if they could ever get it, but it would be American parts workers. So the biggest declines have been in the states where there's been the fastest growth. So there was like a 24% decline in Alabama for what parts workers are making. But none of this is getting factored in to the deal because of this. Because if they're already being produced, the cars are being produced and sourced in the United States, then there is no, they don't come under the new agreement as I understand it. Okay, so it's going to do effectively nothing for that group of workers, a growing group of workers in the United States, some of whom are, getting food stamps and working for lower tier parts manufacturers and so forth like that. So, to me, all the trumpeting, so to speak, of the deal misses this enormous group of workers in the United States who aren't even near, even at this point in time, this is like 2014 data, so probably the wages have gone up somewhat, but in real terms, probably very little, if at all. So that for me is another issue, but it's interesting, there's been no attention to this collapse of wages in the parts sector. So, the entry-level wage and the use, for example, of temporary staffing to recruit workers and so forth, yeah.
Can you just elaborate on that last point you made a little bit? I mean, they got to get 40% of production at this $16 an hour or higher level. Why are the American plants exempt from that?
Because the idea is if you're the components, so I understand if the components in car is basically assembled in the United States, it doesn't cross boundaries.
It's not crossing
It's not going to Mexico, you see.
To imports,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's why.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
So automakers may sell 82% of their U.S. automotive production in the United States, okay? So that means it doesn't, quote, cross
They'll never
Mexico.
trigger that clause.
Oh, no. Because it basically makes the U.S., it reinforces U.S. as much as, even more perhaps now than Mexico, as the low wage.
I think
hub
that's
of-
the intent.
Yeah, I'm sure it
Get
is.
jobs at any cost.
Yes.
It creates the U.S. as a low wage.
Yeah.
The southern U.S. was already a low wage
Yes.
zone.
Yeah,
I
you're
think
right.
it creates further incentive to
Yeah.
create the U.S. as a low
Sure.
wage zone,
Yeah.
while reducing competition from the ultra low wage of Mexico.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry. I will leave off there because I'm sure there's a.
Oh, like,
I was just going to make one comment in
Yeah,
response
yeah.
to that. The labour value content rule really originated with the Canadians in the negotiation.
Yes, it's true.
What did?
The labour value content idea originated with the
Canada.
Canadian
Oh,
negotiations.
absolutely.
Yes, to avoid the 50% in the United States.
That's right.
The rules.
Yeah, I mean, it was a way to, as Graciela says, it's a way, originally the American position was that 50% of the value had
Yes.
to be US value.
Whereas
And
this
that
one
would have been an
not.
utter disaster for both
Yes.
Mexico and Canada.
Canada.
And I think it was back in March,
Yeah.
or maybe even a bit before that, when the Canadians, in a meeting in Montreal, floated the idea of, so they're saying, let's try to reconceptualize this. Don't let's talk about numbers, but let's talk about the process of maybe tying content to wage levels.
okay. We are, in fact, in the second part of the section, which is this exactly. What can we expect? What is the most likely outcomes and process that we are going to see in the short next future? So, you want to say something? Or?
I have tons of questions. I can't
Okay,
wait.
let's just do a second round here for us. I guess you can keep it there. Okay.
Yes, that's.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I'll just move over a little bit here and give you some more space.
There's, yeah. So, yeah, we are here exactly in the second part. Yeah, this is the each.
Oh, sorry.
Well, it's in brief, right?
I got out of order.
Yeah. So to discuss the from our perspective, to discuss likely outcomes of the New Deal, just to start with, this must be ratified, right? This is not a matter of fact. I mean, it's going to be through Congress in each country, so we can see some adjustments. Yeah, we don't know for sure. So, but we got three issues about it. The first one is to remember that NAFTA, from the American perspective, was conceived to keep Asian and European producers out of the region, right? Back in the 80s, remember, the big issue in America was the Japanese people getting here, stealing jobs and all this stuff. So then NAFTA put the rule of origin that was in place. Just it's important to remember, in 50%, adding to 12%. Exactly the amount that is adding right now, another 12%. And from this perspective, exactly, just from this data shows that the result of NAFTA for America was a complete failure. Right?
Yes.
A complete failure. So this is what is exactly, from our perspective, behind all this Trump and all these people. And another thing, so having said this, this is quite important from our perspective. The whole auto sector is moving south. Here are the main corporations. And you can see just from one decade or so, they had moved most of their production from their home countries to emerging countries. This is a big tendency. This is a strong tendency. In overall, by 2000, they have about 2/3 of production at home. Right now, they have 1/3 of the total production at home. So this is a strong, I repeat, a strong tendency. It's not easy. And again, you can say in brief, what is trying to do Trump and all these people is trying to, raising the same concern and the same idea or purpose that American people did 2 decades before. Just from the perspective of tendencies, we are to say that they are going to fail again. That the New Deal is not going to get what they pretend. We will say that Asian and European producers are going to get in Mexico to get the new and meet the new rule of origin threshold. And this arises the next question. From our perspective, the only thing that is able to change this scenario is labor, is institutions, and the institutions of labor. It's the only things, and it lies largely in all the institutions across the 3 countries, and within is critical in the case of Mexico. So we are raising this question and putting this in perspective from what is going on exactly right now in Mexico. Do you want to say something here?
No, you can explain.
This is, this is
better.
because ourselves, we have been not only researchers and professors doing this stuff, but we somehow have been directly involved in many of these issues, especially Graciela. I mean, you can see all this stuff in the 2012 labor reform, and the current reform that is going on in Mexico, and Graciela has been directly involved in all this stuff. Even it's worth to mention that the new labor secretary of the Morena government and the new labor secretary of the Mexico City, which is 25-30% of the economy, the Mexican economy, they are Graciela former students. So, but the point is to say they have been discussing the details of all this stuff, the reforms, subcontracting, the way to get away with protection contracts and all this stuff. Yeah, and many things to say. It's not possible. Just to mention this critical labor convention, the 98 basic convention of ILO, was just ratified in Mexico a few months ago.
In September.
Yeah. So, yeah. I'm going to stop here. We are discussing 4 different scenarios, starting with structural change, impulse from above, and cosmetic change, and intense conflict over representation. Right now, there is going on a conflict, this developing conflict in Mexico. We just was in this seminar. I told you, some of you, and the independent unions create this new federation in metal worker mining sector, and at the same time, official unions were striking in some places and doing noise and reacting in ways that announce that they are going to be aggressive, and you can oversee the conflicts in the horizon. And we put all our hope in the third scenario, which is creating this kind of national framework for the sector. And beyond that, we say that this needs to be part of the national framework labor alliance between the unions of the 3 countries. This is also part of the discussion with Uniform and UAW and Mexican. So I stopped here, so sorry, thank you. And you can continue, any one of you, and then we're gonna open completely the session, okay?
I don't want to go back to the slides. I'd like, more discussion. But I mean, one thing I'd just say is that, I think from one perspective, you could argue that NAFTA, I mean, since 1994, NAFTA had enabled the North American auto industry to remain globally competitive.
From my perspective.
Yeah. And one thing I think with the new agreement is that what is very clear is that one outcome is that it is going to push up the price of vehicles built in North America. Because, I mean, the complexity of the new rules are going to put tremendous costs on companies to comply and to certify that they meet those rules. And so I think that's going to be one outcome, is that it's going to push up the cost of vehicles produced in North America, which then raises the question about what happens to producers who are producing outside of North America and importing. And again, that then depends upon whether there will be 232 tariffs, or whether the US goes to increase the most favored nation tariff. You see, I mean, at the moment, the MFN tariff for cars entering the US is only 2.5%.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, for pickup trucks, it's 25%, and that's that historical
Yes,
thing that goes back to the
much.
so-called chicken tax, which is another story. And for parts, I think it's on average about 3% for order parts going into the US if they don't qualify. And so I kind of partly interpreted that annex
Annex
with the Annex
Annex
2C
23.
as kind of almost indicating that the US is seriously considering
Yeah.
increasing the MFN, not just the 232 tariff, but increasing the MFN tariff using the GATT rules. Anyway, I just throw that out there as to what
They
this
will not
might
do
do.
that for luxury cars.
I'm sorry?
They will not do that for luxury cars. I have no worry about Maserati.
Well, they all have more money thanks to the tax cut in the United States. They can pay more on their cars.
I mean, the other thing I really would like a comment from Alex and Graciela. That, I mean, the point that sort of Todd was kind of making about, can companies have different sourcing patterns depending upon the market for the vehicle? I mean, that's again adds additional cost. But I mean, I've seen comment that Volkswagen in Puebla, that they're exporting to Canada, US, and they're also exporting to Europe. And the content in the cars that go to Europe is different because they have to meet EU, Mexico rules of origin. So there's more German content in the vehicles that are exported from Puebla to Europe. Whereas to meet the current NAFTA rules, there has to be more US Canadian content in those and Mexican content in those vehicles. See, I think the other thing is, I mean, and this is a comment I got, I think, on my last slide. I mean, just this week, Canada ratified comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, right? And so what's the interaction there between these rules? Because the rules of origin in TPP are significantly lower. And so again, from a Canadian point of view, what's the interaction there between two very different sets of rules of origin?
And for companies, though, it's not so easy. I mean, it sounds like you can be strategic. It's not so easy for them to disrupt and change the supply chain. It's not like they just on a dime pivot.
Yeah.
Companies enter into long-term, and this is where the kind of, you can negotiate a trade deal fairly quickly, but companies can't change their supply chain so quickly so that they can respond.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
but
You
then
better, this is quite a good point.
Yes.
Without huge costs.
Yes.
Because not only costs to the vehicle at the consumer point, but the overall supply chain becomes a lot less efficient because suddenly you have to start sourcing from right now. One of the beauties of the current supply chain is they've been able to constantly increase efficiency because of that capacity to know predictability in terms of the market. If you're suggesting this is a change, I think for companies this is a lot bigger challenge.
Yeah, but remember the new regional content value rules are phased. They're phased in beginning in 2020, and they're phased in three steps.
But that's
So
like,
it's
that's
basically
5 años, ¿no?
well, yeah, but they go up progressively in
5 years.
in 3 steps.
But
So-
still, think
and-
about it. How long do companies, I mean, realistically,
But the point that's being made in the industry is that that's roughly the life cycle of a model, and so it
Now,
does
yeah.
give some time for adjustment. I
How long is the
suppose.
life cycle?
Well,
No.
Alex knows more about that than I do.
Sorry, what is that?
How long is the life cycle of a model?
It's increasingly reducing. Right now, you can say it's about 3-4 years, whereas in the past it was double that. we are in that, exactly in that point, 3 or 4 years, not more. Which is related to the progression that they put forward. So,
Hi,
yeah.
sorry, my name's Laura Sterling, former Federal Deputy Minister of Labor, during the negotiations. Just a couple of, and I apologize, I came late, so if I'm repeating things. I'm very interested to see how Mexico reacts to this, because quite frankly, from my perspective, one of the main reasons that Mexico was included in NAFTA initially, I take your point about China, was because the plan was that, the wages would rise in Mexico. And that was what everybody thought, especially the labor unions, which ultimately, backed down when NAFTA was passed. So the labor unions were particularly disappointed that they're still at $2 and $3 an hour. Secondly, when the negotiations started, Canada and Mexico were supposed to be a team.
Yeah,
Vis-a-vis
that's
the
correct.
United States. Right? We had a series of labor clauses, right, that we wanted enhanced, and but Mexico, the negotiators, and presumably the politicians, decided they'd rather ally themselves with the States and left Canada out in the cold.
But
Canada did propose. I don't think Canada ever anticipated being in the position it was in at the end, and really with zero bargaining clout, right? And then it's true that Canada proposed, I think, the change in the change in the formula so that it became dollar-based. I don't think Canada ever anticipated it being as high as $16 in Mexico. That was the Americans that were pushing that, and the Canadian average auto worker earns $20 Canadian, right?
Yeah.
So they're not that far off.
No.
And then finally, these are just observations, right? But the reforms, the constitutional reforms to get rid of the cabs, the new labor court, the government, the previous government, they dragged their butts on this.
Yes.
And if it weren't for the Americans, Obama went down there to force the issue. Peña was like nowhere to be found. And it's taken a long time, and although it looks like it's happening, we have not seen the on-the-ground impacts yet. So, I guess at the end of the day, I would like to be optimistic that
We
this
are
will
not
be a good
optimistic.
deal.
We are not optimistic. We try to do what we can do.
I haven't seen a pattern of conduct, and I haven't seen consequences in Mexico. But then again, there's a new government and a new deal. So you remain optimistic.
It's a big
Okay,
change.
Can I just ask?
Trata de explicar.
Can I just ask the person
Es que
that?
tenemos un
Lori.
problema
Lori.
por todos lados.
You made a comment about at the beginning Mexico and Canada were on the same team. That was the beginning.
Estamos diciendo que cambiaron las reglas
Okay.
solamente.
But I mean, in the media comment that I've seen, the suggestion was that it was the Canadians who first broke that by going the route of tying the wages to value. And the Mexican negotiators were really, really upset
Yes.
at that meeting in Montreal when they felt that the Canadians had broken that arrangement. I'd be, since you were at the center of some
I
of
wasn't
the
actually in the center.
negotiations, but I'm interested in
A ver,
hearing.
pero explique que no
We would like to-
primer paso, ¿no?
We would like to say
Totalmente.
something in this point, Graciela and myself. That we are not kind of optimistic.
No.
In fact, we are let me, I don't know if Brazil agree exactly, we are kind of skeptical in this point. And what we just say is what is going on right now in Mexico. But we are clear, we stress that all this depends exactly the way that labor will be able to impact on the institutions and mobilize and do alliance first at the internal level, then to the transnational level.
Yes.
Because the labor is completely fragmented. In Mexico, is completely weak, all that you want to stress. So, but we just say, yeah, right now there is this new government coming in office, and these
rules.
people is taking positions, but we discussed even, just to put in perspective, this is my idea,
Yes,
it not to be a Garcia idea. I just discussing with Unifor and independent unions and all these people. I say, hey, you have to remember, this situation is in many respects comparable to the situation in Brazil 15 years ago when Lula was going to take the place. And right now, 15 years after Lula took office for the first time, because Lula took office 2 times, but 15 years after that, Lula is in prison, and a new right, a fascist guy is going to take run the country. So, in the Latin American context, the relationship between labor and the state always has been complicated. So, and a second point that I like to stress is this. We don't know exactly how these rules are going to be calculated, measured, and enforced. But I like to say this. From the, I try to sense the feeling of the corporations. I have been talking with some CEOs, and they are really happy about it. They are happy about it. There is not any concern about it. So far, I can be wrong. It could be some adjustment. I don't know. But right now, I can tell you for sure, they are. Oh, this is exactly the kind of thing that we were expecting. And I asked you some of them, how about this $16, what is that they say? $16? Oh, this is just for American and Canadians. This is not for Mexico. And
yes, because it's in the North American.
I tried to figure out what they are thinking about it. How is they going to be enforced? And in one point made me think that even it could represent at the end the threshold not for Mexico but for Canada and the US. The threshold, in fact, is in the two-tier system that you put in. This is the kind of threshold that you have right now. I mean, firms start paying new hires about $16, $17, $18 per hour. So, yeah. And the final point. So, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
No, que están más preocupados por lo que pasa dentro que por el tratado, ¿no? O sea, están preocupados por el cambio interno.
Yeah, Graciela is right. They may concern, if any, right now, is that Morena is taking office. They are not concerned at all about the new NAFTA.
The new NAFTA. The problem is that
the last point that we like to put in perspective is that don't lose sight that the industry is going to a new cycle right now. In the near future, the industry is going to probably freeze and start to decreasing after one decade or so of this boom, expansive situation. And our idea is that the American particularly are trying to protect the medium and high sector, pickups, SUVs, and all this stuff. And this is related to the oil era and the shale revolution and all this energy, traditional energy that they are putting in, which means they are going to do exactly what they do 2 decades ago. About 2 decades ago, they profit and get stronger again, expanding this sector, the pickup series and everything. So it makes it, in many respects, they are trying to going back exactly, not thinking and going forward. So, yeah, Charlotte. Yeah.
So I have a question about corporate strategy. So in a way, it picks up on a number of the comments. If one thinks about the expenses of qualifying for duty-free status, and if you think of the low value of the tariffs for importing full vehicles, why wouldn't most of the companies operating in Mexico say, we're actually not going to invest in, because there's going to be a huge administrative cost to actually administering and overseeing that you qualify, using the new rules of origin, using the new tracing system. All of that is going to require huge investment. What's to say a company isn't going to say, listen, we're not even going to bother. Parts companies in Canada already do that. They just say, we'll import to the US without going duty-free because it's more cost efficient for us. What's to say that companies operating in Mexico won't say, listen, at $2 an hour, and given all the complexity, I'd be better off to keep wages down and then import vehicles from Mexico anyway, until such time as then if they introduce Section 232, there's still protection. So that would be my first, I'd be interested in people's, if you think, what's the other options for retaliatory action by the US, because the US would, obviously, that's not their intent, but it's a possibility. The other thing I'm worried about is the labor $16 an hour. And I know I've asked you this, John, repeatedly. How they calculate that becomes really important, because if casual, right now, wage rates in the US and in auto do not take into account those people hired on a casual or necessarily a temporary part-time basis. One way of getting around this, if they needed to get around it at all, particularly in Canada where we are higher wage, would be just to increase the number of people who are casualized. And you look at somewhere like General Motor and Oshkosh, where they adjusted their collective agreement in a way where now those new, more casualized employees outnumber the full-time. And that is a huge problem for the union, but it's also a huge problem for these being good wage jobs, because they're not great wage jobs because they've been hollowed out. So I'd like to know if you think, if you have any insight, or anybody does, about how those labor provisions will be calculated, because I think it could all be a way for Trump to see, yes, I have protected the interests of American workers, whereas in reality, it has the perverse effect of forcing a further restructuring of our labor market here in Canada and potentially in the US and Mexico.
I think the thing to remember is that the $16 rule applies to 40% of the value. Okay, and things like engines and transmissions constitute a significant proportion of the value,
higher wage,
and those tend to be higher wage, higher wage production facilities. So I think you have to, one has to bear that in mind. I mean, my sense is that the $16 issue is really directed at the parts sector. I mean, that's the intention. And you see, and within that 40%, 15% can come from R&D.
Exacto.
And another
Right,
5%
okay.
can come from final assembly,
Yes.
which again are higher wage segments of the overall industry.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not answering the question, but I think those are some
Yes.
contexts to think about.
Yes.
I got so far I got the same idea. Yeah, that is there just to say we already made this requirement, taking into account how the main parts just.
Yeah. Do you think that it will really hit? I mean, a comment I make in the paper that Charlotte and I have just done is that my thinking there was that there are Japanese and European companies who are producing small vehicles in Mexico who are still importing engines and transmissions. And that rule could, but also remember there's the other rule in chapter 4 that says that major components now have to be originating. So engines, transmissions,
Así es important.
suspension systems have to be originating. So it's some of the small, the subcompact and compact vehicles that are being produced in Mexico by some D3, but mainly non-D3, that will really feel the crunch on those bits of the rules. But I don't know, you know way more about Mexico than I do.
Yeah, I don't think so. And
Okay.
but I'm going to answer. But you are
John.
trying to.
John.
Yeah, John. Sorry. Yeah, trying to. I wanna put please. Yeah.
It's sort of great information, right? I mean, it's wonderful to see, and
Thank
it's
you.
lovely to be in a room where you have all the auto experts that I know, right, in Canada, the United States, and people who are critical, right? The other thing, though, I guess, is looking at this and the information, and to be perfectly honest, it scares the crap out of me. And maybe I'm going to start with an analogy, which I was thinking when we were talking about platform capitalism the other day at one of the sessions with Amanda and ETUI.
What does that mean, John? What do you mean by that?
Oh, well, the metaphor I'm going to start with is Amanda likes movies a lot, right? We're talking about the cultural industry, right? And there's a great sci-fi movie called The Matrix. Now, maybe not every one of you know about The Matrix, right? So it's a 3-part, 4-part movie series. And it's about, it's a sci-fi future, terrible future scenario where everyone is walking around and it looks like everything is pretty normal. But this fellow, he gets taken or chosen by some of the other revolutionaries and they show, here's what your reality actually is like, right? There is no future. Instead, it's all these computers, right, okay? And these computerized monsters that have destroyed your planet and are now using human bodies as their fuel, right, to maintain and run computers and computer operation. And of course, then they have to try and fight this, right, that they have, right? And to some degree, what it's a metaphor is about capitalism chewing up people and people not realizing about sort of problems they're looking at. And I wonder if, I know this might be a big question, but since you're all auto experts, here's what the Guardian and the IPCC has to say. We have 12 years for global warming to be kept to a maximum of 1.5 degrees Celsius, beyond which even a half degree will significantly worsen the risks of droughts, floods, extreme heat, and poverty for hundreds of millions of people. Alex, your numbers showing me about what's happening to the global auto industry make me want to die. Like I'm thinking, how can I look at my 5-year-old in the face, right? The global auto industry is using more, right, oil and gas than any other industry, and we are producing millions and millions and millions of more cars.
Yeah.
That's the first question. What about the waste problem? Even the World Economic Forum now is saying global waste from the auto industry, right, is destroying planets. And what can't be shipped to China, right, is destroying the people who are trying to recycle it in China, right? The millions and hundreds of thousands of people who are taking apart all the crap that comes from auto. They are burning and trying to recycle rubber and tires. They are burning and trying to recycle all the computerized parts. The third part comes from this is the global use of those resources for this, right? We are running out of all those fancy kinds of phosphorus and high-end minerals, right? We can talk about how global capitalism is screwing workers, okay? And how we got to try and fight that. But unless we ask that other question to say, how is it that as people and as citizens and as workers, we're not going to destroy our planet? And how are we going to make those companies completely transform? And completely transform from gas guzzling, right? Resource using, waste destroying of our environment. We're dead, right? We're not, to me, I'm afraid that we're asking the wrong question here, right? It's not just about the trade agreements here, right? How are we going to control those auto companies and flip this on our head? We need them to stop producing gas cars. We need them to start producing public transportation.
Yes.
We need it to produce electric public transportation.
Yes.
And we need it now, not 100 years from now.
Yes, now.
We need it now. And the more we discuss about how Trump and the auto manufacturers, and I think you're right, I mean, I still haven't figured it all out, but I'm sure that much of this is about trying to just fuck over workers everywhere, right? To greater or lesser degrees. This is what this is all about. Whether, right, in one way or another, it's about whipsawing all the workers in these industries so that they cannot think that they are stuck in a matrix.
Yes.
Of not looking about what's happening because they are so worried about their individual jobs. But that's the wrong question for me. The question is we need that industry to be transformed, right? And we need the workers in that industry to lead that fight in transforming those industries.
Yeah. Somebody else.
On your reminder
yeah.
of our conscience, and
We
that's
will-
really important.
We can do a last round of question and interventions for us to try to close in a last round for ourselves. So anybody wants raise a question or comment? Yeah, please.
You raised the impact of the TPP.
Yes.
And less so CETA, but
Yeah.
it's out there. So do you think, can you answer the question?
Can I answer the question?
Yeah, what do you think?
I think that TPP doesn't do much for Canadian exports. I think that the biggest worry in TPP is still in the parts sector. That, I mean, the rules of origin there mean that so much can be non-originating. And so in terms of particularly Japanese vehicles built in Japan for import into Canada could contain a lot of very low value parts from because those vehicles being built in Japan now, the supply chains are China, Vietnam, Thailand, etc. And the rules of origin are such. I mean, I did a paper for CCPA on TPP, but when it was still TPP, which we used the title "The Devil is in the Details," because there was this clause buried in an annex there that says all kinds of stuff can be classified as non-originating, which really lowers the regional content value.
So I didn't mean to ask about TPP, I just meant to ask TPP
Oh.
in respect of like the relationship between TPP and...
Yeah, and I think that's again, it's this difference between, now much higher rules within USMCA versus the much lower rules under TPP, and it's very common. I mean, it really is complicated trying to
Yes.
figure out the interaction there.
But
And
John,
it's
you did in our paper, you did explicate it a bit more, so maybe you could share that, because it really is, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but you have thought through this, sorry, and you have thought through what the implications were in some examples.
Sorry,
No, but I can't
can we finish, can we end the last round of you, if anybody of you want to rise or put some comments for us to do the last round. Anybody else got a question or comment, please? Every intervention has been great. Wonderful points. How about you? Yeah,
We have 5 minutes.
you got something?
Oh, I've learned a tremendous amount from this, actually. So I'm just absorbing it all at this point.
Okay, so, yeah. Can you continue and come to
I
give
think I've
us
said too
ideas
much.
and conclusions or
No,
points that, yeah?
I focused on the trade deal because
Okay.
that's been so immediate.
Yeah, yeah.
And trying to, I mean, in terms of writing the paper with Charlotte, I was having to rewrite the trade section almost every week because things were changing. But I would emphasize that in the paper, I mean, we talk about other challenges to the industry, and we talk about the radical technological shift that's needed because of climate policy, essentially. But again, now that's kind of out the window, right, to some extent, with with the US walking away from that, and Ontario walking away from cap and trade. I agree with you that it's a big issue, and not just to move to electric, but how's the electricity generated? I mean, the push towards electric vehicles makes a lot, and incentives for electric vehicles makes a lot of sense in a province like Quebec, or some other areas where most of the hydro is being produced by renewable sources. But I think that's a big issue. I mean, I've been interested in the auto industry for like ever,
Yeah.
5 years. I just find it interesting, and I really enjoy interaction with my Mexican colleagues in terms of thinking about what's happening in North America. As I say, I think to some extent from a Canadian perspective, and I'm back on the trade stuff again, but we really did dodge a bullet. Okay, that it could have been really disastrous for the industry in all 3 countries.
Okay, Tom?
Well, I don't have much more to add, but I mean, I guess thinking about John's question, I mean, going back to what I was talking about yesterday in the plenary, is that I think that we need to better connect the demands of the workers' movement with environmental issues, and because I think they have been presented as opposites and in tension and with each other, and we have to realize that we have to secure people's livelihoods at the same time that we build a greener future. And I think that if we can better integrate those as part of a broader set of demands for control over our economy, control over our livelihoods, then that would be, I think, to me, a way forward. And at various points in time, elements of the labor movement have been interested in that. And I think part of the problem is that there's these whirlwinds of immediate issues that are, that they have to sell it to their membership. They have to bring them along. And when somebody is thinking about losing a job with 2 kids and then global warming is still like this kind of, it's not seen as an existential thing in the same way that losing your job is. And that's a really, how do you get people to think about those in the same light? That is a very, very difficult issue. It's not impossible, but it's a difficult one.
Okay, we want to add some ideas, going to your question, what we see is in the last decade, as a part of this boom, Japanese, especially Japanese, but also Detroit, were not only moving their assembly plants, but when they did that, they start moving also transmission and engines plants. In the case of Japanese, it's quite clear. Right now they are putting 2 or 3 new assembly plants just in the Bajío region, and Hatco is the main engine producer, Japanese producer, and I don't remember the name of another one, which is one is for Toyota and another one is for Nissan. Move at the same time. So you go to the Bajío region and you see this huge complex assembly plants, and then comes the transmission and engine plants. And I think that they are going to keep doing the same. I think that what they're gonna do and they are doing right now, I think that they are adjusting the equation in the mix of production and parts just to meet the new rules. I think that this is the approach that they are going to put, and but at the end, for keeping the same tendencies. And also, I want to say that we are completely agree with John's intervention. We say we are in the middle of this double. Personally, I call it double trap. Is the oil trap and the labor trap. Yeah, and the oil trap means that, but this is incredible, because even if you take a look, we are discussing, and you are right, all this stuff, but we are probably losing sight that this is clearly connected to an energy paradigm, an energy ecosystem, approach, framework, where the cars and all this stuff is first, and the people and human ecology is at the end, right? So, but not only that, right now we cannot lose the sight that Trump is doing the same stuff with emissions control. He put back the standards that Obama just put forward. He put it back. And even right now there are about, I don't remember, 20-something lawsuits for leading for California, but they then come about 19-something, no, 20-something states protecting and demanding and trying to say this is the standard and we are going to stick to them regardless what this guy say. So this is a battle between local government and institutions and Trump and all these people, because behind Trump and we cannot lose is the big corporations and the big oil companies and all this stuff. So the only is not in Brave America who is moving forward the transition. Is the one that is resisting the transition to a new paradigm, which is slowly moving in Central Europe and somehow in by China. For other reasons, this is a big discussion, but I think China see the opportunity to take the lead of the world with new technologies. Yeah. And right now it's the country that is producing 4-5% of electrical new energy propulsion cars.
I'd just like to make a comment about that.
Yeah.
If you go to Europe and you move to electricity to for the cars. You will have to make electricity. And what they will do, they will make electricity with coal, nuclear energy, because they don't have hydropower. Hydropower is fully used in Europe. There's no other place to build hydro plant. So what do you have to do to provide fuel? Instead of having gas in the tank, you will have gas in the power plant where they will make electricity. Because you need the source, the primary source to make electricity. And here in Quebec we have a very, very interesting point of view because we have so much hydropower, we don't need to do that. We can generate electricity, green electricity, because we have so much hydropower. But in countries where they don't have, you will have to supply the primary fuel. It could be oil, gas, coal. In Germany now, they use more coal than before to generate electricity.
Yeah.
So sometimes we must be very cautious about there's no magic in that. If you want to drive so many cars, individual cars, luxury cars, SUVs, and all that stuff, you will have to provide them with fuel.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem. And if you want to move to public transit, that's a good idea. But public transit, there is another game. It is the Buy America Act. We have here in Montreal, Bombardier, with a huge plant close to Quebec City. We have Nova Bus, have a huge plant here close to Montreal. But to sell in the US market, they have established plan with very low wage in Plattsburgh, New York. Very low wage, no union, in a region which is very, very Trump. And there you have big plans from Nova Bus to supply New York City Transit, Chicago Transit. You have Bombardier there they made the frame of the cars, the frame of the bus in Quebec, and they moved there. And the suppliers, those who provide them with parts, they have also moved in order to meet the 60 or 65 and 70% sometimes to be able to get there. So on the industrial side, there are also the upside of the problem. And for a while, we used to make the transit car all in Quebec, full car. They were made in La Pocatière for New York City.
I just wanna react briefly to this point. Yeah, and I say, in Europe there are many initiatives taking place, and the transition is not only the transition to the new car. It's a transition to new mobilities and imply many things. The small mobilities are progressing faster than the car mobilities or new mobilities. So, and last point of Graciela and myself, we see that in Mexico there is coming a new labor framework, a new labor model, new labor institutions. We see that this is coming. But again, this is going to take us to the main point in Mexico, which is enforcement. Who is going to enforce and how this new model, these new labor institutions? Because, just to remind you, independent unions in this highly unionized sector are just a tiny part. And we got there about 80-90% of official unions, protection contracts, and gangsters. And right now, intertwined with crime, this is true. So it's going to be a big challenge to do something. So we need to keep you to stay in tone and.
It's a big space for experimentation.
We see this is
a really big space for experimentation. And this is the topic, the issue of this meeting.
In tandem with the topic of this Congress, if you want to see experimentation, go to Mexico. This is a moment right now. This is a place where we are to be and discuss and do things together. We need to be together. Thank you. Thank you for your time.